is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
I'm a Jedi, like my father before me.
All right, everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Legends Library. My name is Cade, and I'm joined with my friend Tristan here.
Hello, you can find me on YouTube with the same name, Tristan Robertson.
All right, awesome. And we are very happy to bring to you this first episode of the Legends Library. This is going to mainly be an audio podcast where the main discussion point will be the Star Wars Expanded Universe, now known as Legends. And for this first episode, we're going to be going over our answers to the Star Wars Questionnaire that's been going around the Star Wars community, originally posted by Grey Jedi 91. So jumping right into it here, the first question is Jedi or Sith? I personally would pick the Jedi because they're the good guys and their values include helping the galaxy and people in need, for the most part, of course. They also tend to not be as, genocidal as most of the Sith Lords are. Plus, I don't really want to get hit with that dark side degradation and look 70 when I'm 25.
Are they going to call me Darth Syphilis?
Yeah, yes, of course.
I agree with a lot of the same points. I think Sith philosophy is a lot more flexible, and Jedi philosophy is very rigid, and I would probably be a terrible Jedi. But in universe and in terms of organizations, I would be a Jedi mostly because the Sith are typically very paranoid, and it's a very hostile environment. Whereas Jedi at least try to strive for good, and again, aren't genocidal unless it's like the Korriban situation. But again, that's more with the Republic.
Yeah, no, for sure. Obviously, these are like way boiled down things, but genocide bad.
I would probably end up being like Dooku or Jolie, going off and doing my own thing. Hopefully, not with the intention of dark side curiosity and joining up with Palpatine, but
or living under a tree stump for decades.
That too.
So the next question is your favorite worlds. I chose 3, and my 3 were Dantooine for its Jedi history, and it's like generally calm, chill atmosphere as long as mercenaries aren't like roaming about. Alderaan for its varied climate zones, and it has like really cool looking architecture, pre like Death Star, of course. And third, Naboo, basically for the same reasons as Alderaan, but it specifically has Lakes Country, which I literally grew up living in. I'm from like West Central Minnesota. Like the town I was born in was literally called the Heart of Lakes Country, and I could go hang out underwater with the Gungans.
Oh God, no. I would try to avoid that situation at all costs, even though I do too have Naboo on my list. Naboo is my favorite planet to go to on Star Wars Galaxies. It's one of my favorite worlds in the prequels and in Star Wars in general, as seeing as how it's on my list here. But it is very beautiful, and it's very serene, and that's why I have Dantooine on here too, because these are worlds I would like to operate as a Jedi on, because they're very small, in relatively speaking, with the Star Wars universe, especially with things like Coruscant, which is just impossible to manage. It's very small scale, and it seems like an easy place to center yourself. Contrastingly, I also have Korriban on my list, because Korriban is by far my favorite planet to visit in KOTOR, and even though earlier I said I would prefer to be a Jedi, I love Sith philosophy, and I love the tombs and the architecture of Korriban as well. And smoldering, burning rock as it is, it's a very interesting planet, and I would really like to excavate and explore and run into some ghosts and shit.
Yeah, it'd be really fun to explore the tombs until Takata comes and like rips off your head or something.
Takata Mother.
Or you
the Force.
or or you disturb one of the KOTOR 2 dead bodies, and the Hissis show up and
Ooh,
just absolutely terrify you when you're 10 years old playing the game for the first time.
it was worth the energy stem, though, I have to say.
I remember one time I recovered a life support pack that I had to use fighting off the Hissis.
Perfectly balanced.
Yes, of course. So moving on, favorite worlds, of course, leads into favorite species. I'm a huge fan of the Yuuzhan Vong. I've never ever made that like a secret. I know for some people they're like a kind of like a guilty pleasure kind of thing, but like literally just for their sheer difference from anything else in Star Wars and their unique culture, like they're set so far apart from everything in Star Wars. I mean, obviously because they're from a literal different galaxy, which the Star Wars galaxy is already different to us. So it's cool that they're like alien to literally everybody within the universe. And their culture, where their whole um, basis of everything being organic, even their like starships and their world ships, and like just the design for them is just in general like very very interesting as well, contrasted to the rest of the galaxy. Twi'leks I chose for their like they're iconic. They're like, in my opinion, they're like the Star Wars alien that I think of when someone says like Star Wars alien. I immediately picture Bib Fortuna in episode 6, the ugly green Twi'lek. But I mean, like besides him, like they just have so many other like iconic characters that are also Twi'leks, like Mission Veo from KOTOR, Shadow Veo from Legacy, Alis Kira, and of course like the OG Twi'lek, Bib Fortuna, the Major Domo. And then my third one to pick here, yes, exactly, exactly. And then I chose Wookiees for kind of the same reason. Like they're a very iconic species as well. But I
It's one
also
of the first
really,
aliens you see.
yeah, literally, it's like the first one that you really like associate with. Like obviously in the cantina, there's all like, well, I guess Jawas maybe, but like the first named alien that you see is Chewbacca, a Wookiee, and immediately like they're designed so striking because they're a giant dog basically. But no, I really like their loyalty to like their friends. I think is like a really good virtue to their species, as well as their like general design, despite the fact that their entire species gets by wearing only bandoliers.
Yeah. I almost put Wookiees on my list for the same reasons. The life depth's very interesting, especially with characters like Hanhar in KOTOR 2, who sadly doesn't get the time of day from a lot of people, myself included, even. Uh, uh, with the Vong, I have never liked them, but since the trauma that is the sequel trilogy, I'm very open to them now. So I will give them a shot and see where that goes. For my 3 species, I have the Given. It's a very cool species. It's basically the Ghostface killer from Scream, but in the Star Wars universe and before Scream came out. They're all mathematicians, and they don't need navigational charts because they can just calculate hyperspace in their head, which I think is very interesting, and especially interesting in the context of force enhancement. Force enhancement to species qualities like the Ithorian and the Clone Wars micro series. How he can blast people away with force waves because of his throat. I'd be very interested in seeing how that would apply itself to the Given. Second, I have Trandoshans because I've always liked lizard people. Bossk is one of my favorite aliens in the original trilogy and in the Star Wars saga. It's also an interesting culture, being a hunting culture, and one that actually hunts Wookiees, which is this pre-established species that's supposed to be really strong, and everybody knows how strong Wookiees are. It establishes them as a really great threat. And lastly, I have Keldor, because Plo Koon has long been one of my favorite Jedi on design alone, even though his character is nothing in the films and very limited even in the expanded universe. Most of the stuff coming from TCW and the stories branching off from that.
I mean, as far as Plo Koon's character goes in the films, I mean, it can basically be summarized as explodes.
He's kamikaze.
Yeah, pretty much. Trandoshans are really cool. I gave thought to putting them on, but because I don't know why, I'm like the same as you. Like I enjoy like big bipedal lizard people.
Argonians are one of my favorites in Elder Scrolls.
Yes, exactly. Like just they're always very interesting. But whenever I think of Trandoshans, I always think of Bosk, like in his kind. Like I think his outfit in episode 5 is kind of like dumpy looking on him. And if he would have been in something a bit more like striking, I guess, like for some reason, like I always have in my head, like when I picture a Trandoshan in like a big furry like vest made of like a Wookiee or something.
It's like Corella Deville, but made out of Wookiee fur.
Yes, that's the perfect like, description. And yeah, given for some reason, when I was younger, I actually got them and the Yuuzhan Vong confused somehow because when I read the description of the Vong on Wikipedia, I saw skull-like face and then typed in like skull face alien Star Wars or something, and it came up with given. So for like the longest time, I thought the two species were the same.
Yeah, I can see why. I just wish the Yuuzhan Vong design was more consistent because at one time they look like these badass skeletal things with eyes, and they look very creepy, like that art they used for Namador's action figure. Other times they look like very poorly drawn Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes, either that or also space orcs.
That too. I'm not a fan.
There's one picture of art that's like really famous with the Vong, and it's literally a bunch of them running, and it looks exactly like this picture of goblins from Lord of the Rings.
I was going to say the Minds of Moria.
Exactly, they look exactly like that with the pointed ears, and they're all pale. The design, basically, yeah, it's like what you said. When I picture the Vong, I picture the Japanese covers for a lot of the NJO books also have some really good art for the Yuuzhan Vong, as well as the Essential Reader's Companion, and those are like the definitive ones that stick in my head. But their design when it's on, it's on, especially with their I don't know why I like their crab armor.
I do too.
But now on to the next one here, away from the species finally, and favorite vehicles. I only picked one because in Star Wars, for some reason, I've never been a fan of land vehicles because it seems kind of pedestrian, considering they live in like they live in a like galaxy where space travel is like readily available for like 99% of like the galaxy. So I picked, and I also really love the like big ships, but just to be kind of different, and because I just really love the design and the comics they're from, I chose the Pelion class Star Destroyer from Legacy. I mean, it's got that like general arrowhead shape that's really iconic to Star Wars ships. I love the Imperial too, but the coolest thing about the Pelion class is like the height of it. Like it's also very tall, and it basically, I love that it was built also to answer the deficiencies of like the larger executor class dreadnoughts. Like it could take one on, but it's like a fifth of the size, and I really appreciate that. Also, it has complements of the sweet TIE fighters from Legacy as well, which gives it just that extra bonus.
Yes, the Empire's always had a much better aesthetic.
Oh, just yeah, even all the way to Legacy, like the aesthetic is so much better than like the Galactic Alliance and the Rebels. I mean, the Mon Calamari ships literally look like floating space turds or like giant
turds. Exactly. I don't know. They did the Rebels dirty in the original trilogy.
They did.
And they did it worse in the sequels. God.
Yeah, like the only ships that stick out at me that I like for the Rebel Alliance are the Nebulons and the Corellian corvettes.
That's about me too.
Yeah. I guess the Liberties are okay, the ones with the wings, but other than that, like, I mean, X-wings are iconic. Y-wings are cool. I've never been a fan of A-wings, to be honest.
Me neither, really.
But I like the Empire, like all their ships, they're nice and symmetrical, which I guess kind of fits into their whole, big evil organization thing. But
Very precise and angular.
yes, giant triangles in space.
Exactly. Moldy pizzas flying around and shooting lasers.
Of course. And yeah, that was my only one, so I'm kind of boring.
I've stuck with one. It's just for simplicity's sake. I went with the Sith Infiltrator, Darth Maul's ship in the Phantom Menace. Phantom Menace was probably the first Star Wars movie I've seen. I may have watched the original trilogy first, because it came out the year I was born, so and I just remember playing with the lightsaber in front of my TV, watching Darth Maul do shit. It's a very standout ship. It's like the TIE fighters and the X-Wings had a baby, and it's really big. I think one of the most underrated aspects of the prequel trilogy were them inventing new designs that also kind of meshed a little bit, at least somewhat well, with the original trilogy. You have the ships like the Nubian starfighters from Naboo that are just really pristine and shiny and don't fit well with what was established at all. But Darth Maul's ship just oozes cool to me. It has all the red accents, and it's just cool. That's it.
Oh yeah, no, that's like the best thing about picking like a Star Wars vehicle is it's basically just rule of cool over everything.
It really is.
Well, and I mean, there's also the fact that at least on like a capital ship or like on the Sith infiltrator ship, at least you can like get up and move around. It's not like you're in like basically a car seat for like an entire hyperspace jump. Like,
God no, I could at least you can do a Zumba class and that.
yeah, like
I think
you got room to like you could put like a nice living room or something in there.
Yeah, freighters are ideal for that, like the Millennium Falcon or the Ebon Hawk. I almost put the Ebon Hawk on here. They can fit a treadmill if you need it.
Yeah, exactly. You can stay in shape. It's not like you're in a like being in an X-wing. I think would just be awful. Like I get like I guess like kind of cabin fever really easy. So I could never sit in like an X-wing for like a 2-day hyperspace jump and just sit there and like read a book for 2 days straight. I guess would be your only option. Talk with your astromech.
God, please God no.
Yeah.
I would, if we had like Cairo sleep, like an alien or some shit like that, I would be fine. But God, my legs would be sore after getting into that thing.
Well, at least if you're a Jedi like Luke, basically in any post Return of the Jedi stuff, when Luke's like hyperspace traveling in his X-wing, it's all right, R2. I'm going to go in a hibernation trance. So at least the Jedi can get away with that.
If you were blessed to be force sensitive in the Star Wars universe, it'd be fine.
Oh yeah.
But otherwise, God.
Yeah, but like Wedge Antilles hyperspacing in his X-wing.
Like, what if you had to piss?
You know,
do they have bathrooms in X-wings?
You know, I don't think that's ever been answered, but you're asking the questions that need to be answered.
See, we need to bring back legends and publish stories about bathrooms.
Yes, of course. I might change one of my later answers to that. But the next question, and my personal favorite one, because I love getting into this, is the lightsaber. What would your lightsaber style, color, and fighting style be? So
it's one of my favorites too.
It's fun because they're like literally everybody can have a different answer. People are going to overlap with like favorite species and favorite worlds, but like getting into the really deep levels of nerdy Star Wars stuff where you're picking lightsaber styles, it's much more fun. But I would personally choose a green saber staff because one, green is my favorite color, and saber staffs are like very visually pleasing. Two, at most time periods they were like kind of a seldom used weapon. I know in like the kind of KOTOR era, they kind of get used a little more. In post Return of the Jedi, I'm struggling to think of anyone at all outside of unnamed Academy students.
The Twilight, whatever his name is, in Legacy.
Oh yeah,
I've not read Legacy, so
Shadowveo.
yeah, I wanted to say that, but I didn't want to be wrong.
Yes, no, I had mentioned him in one of my previous
Yeah,
answers. Yeah, no,
he
but
had it.
no, that it's so kind of that, like, with them being seldom used, like it's kind of stated in a lot of source material that like it's difficult to fight against them just because they're so seldom used. So that kind of gives me like an automatic edge in fighting. And then for fighting form, like the 7 lightsaber forms, I would choose to just master Form 5 in its entirety. So Dejemso and Shien, I would use my strength in any lightsaber combat in conjunction with Dejemso, plus like there's just the application of a saber staff is you can theoretically, as long as you don't swing it horizontally and bisect yourself, you can leverage it a lot more because you have all that surface area that you can swing with. And then Shien I can use against uncivilized people who are trying to use blasters, because I especially like with Shien that it specifically says, or one of the things about it is specifically to like redirect blaster bolts directly at people, whereas Sarisu you're basically just shooting it up into the ceiling and down to the floor, and it's kind of just blocking. I guess I much prefer like the countering aspect of it.
Sarisu in a lot of ways is just delaying the inevitable. Unless you're Obi-Wan, you can just cut somebody down because you have a limited stamina.
Oh yeah, of course. And then also though I would use aspects from Nyman, like chaining in force attacks, because I think especially in the movies, like that's such an underused aspect. Obviously because that they don't have the special effects to keep sending like people flying every 10 seconds.
Of course, budget cuts.
And just the fact it would get kind of boring because it's mentioned all the times in like the novels that force barriers are a thing and you can't see them. So
I don't know why this hasn't been established in a movie. Like, why are force walls not a discussion?
Well, I think it would just be kind of like boring visually to watch because someone would hold out their hand to like do a force push and then just nothing would happen.
If you did it with someone like Vader, and like you force pushed Vader, and like his cape kind of flows a little bit, like in the Force Unleashed 2 trailer, where Galen does the repulse, and it's kind of like a gust of wind over him instead of actually pushing him back or disintegrating him like stormtroopers.
Yeah, that's true, but I mean,
because as it stands right now, it's kind of a plot hole because you have the whole discussion of like, why don't they just keep throwing each other around, or why don't they just cut off their lightsabers?
Yeah,
I think a training sequence could be good if handled correctly. I don't trust them to do it now, given the track record.
Yeah, I mean, now that you say it, it does sound like overly easy to do, but it's probably just one of those things that was just got, they were more interested in doing, sword fights as opposed to, well, except for the Yoda and Sidious fight, of course.
I love that fight.
But then, as well as chaining in force attacks, I would also, and this is the only thing I would take from Ataru, would be like the physical attack, like punching, kicking, etc. But nothing else from Ataru because my stamina is already god awful. When I go to the gym, I don't do any cardio. I couldn't be like a marathon Ataru user, and I get winded pretty easily.
Yeah, I just had to get a fucking inhaler, so that's not going to be good for me. If I had to use Ataru, I would do it like how Shakti does, in like very short bursts of just like flourishing and like wrapping a tapestry of light around you so you don't know where the hell I'm coming from. But it is a very exhaustive lightsaber form. Which is a good segue into my lightsaber forms because the first one I have is Makashi. Like you, I too do not do cardio. I just had, like I said earlier, I had to get a fucking inhaler because I can't breathe and my heart starts hurting a lot. So Makashi's very energy conservative, but it's also very efficient. So you can cut through somebody's guard without exerting yourself too heavily. But I've also paired this with the Jimso and Nyman. I would probably only use it with bursts, like you would with the Taru and Shakti. But I think it's a very nice way of getting well-rounded and using two different aspects of dueling. I'm gonna be able to do fuck all in terms of blast deflection, but hopefully I can just run away really fast. That too. I know all about these energy shields. And with Nyman, again with the force integration, I'd like to incorporate that into my moveset, but I've also with Nyman you're drawing aspects of all the previous forms, excluding Juyo, because I mean Juyo's shit anyway, I wouldn't want it anyway. And it's you kind of have a card for every situation. It's not the best card, but like mastering that fully with Makashi and Jimso to supplement it, I think is a good way to go. As for what lightsaber I would have, I have originally had a standard lightsaber, and I have since changed my answer to Senya's lightsaber pike, because you can have a standard lightsaber but also extends into a full lightsaber pike. So you're not lugging around the whole thing like the Shadow Guards and the Force Unleashed. It's a very practical weapon. Spears are one of the most, if not the most, efficient and practical melee weapon throughout history. And also people have, it's so rare that you would have the same things going for you as you would with a saber staff, because people don't know what the shit to do against it. And
yeah, basically by the time of like the prequels, anytime someone saw something that wasn't just like a meter long stick, they'd kind of just like crap their pants. Like they really didn't know what to do. Which
unless
is
you're like,
which I mean is kind of funny considering like the Jedi Path, like the little in-universe source book, like talks about how to like counter the saber staff and all the other things, but I guess in universe that was only passed around from like person to person. But you would figure like Sit and Draw, like the Battle Master or something, would be like, hey, by the way, this is how you beat this.
well, that's the problem with the Jedi in general, especially like in Dooku's perspective, because they've kind of dropped off from all this shit, whether you attribute it to shitty writing or stagnation that was intended. But when you used weapons like these, especially in the case of the light whip, and especially in the case of Lumaya's light whip, you really don't have to be that skilled because people don't know how to deal with it. That being said, with a saber staff and with definitely with a lightsaber pike, I would definitely have to use a lightsaber resistant metal because it'd be useless otherwise. It's a good choice. As for color, preferably I would like red, but seeing as how I'd probably be a member of the Jedi Order and it was retcon that you can't have red lightsabers in the Jedi Order, probably yellow. Kind of like the amber yellow that you have in like the KOTOR games, like with Bastila especially.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. Or if you really wanted to cheat and get as close to red as you could basically just tell the Jedi Council that it's not red; it's just really, really, really dark orange.
There you go. It's blood orange. It's a little edgy, but it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's almost like all the way edgy, but it's only kind of edgy.
There's blood in the name, for God's sake.
Yeah. Anyways, mentioning the Jedi Council is a pretty good segue to the next question of what Jedi Master would you want to train you if you were a Jedi? My pick is Kyle Katarn. He's always been one of my favorite Jedi, but short little checklist here. You'd get saber training from the NJO's Battle Master. You'd learn Force powers from someone who has a unique view on the Force, who was also like very powerful in his era. And also, you would get to be in the NJO, who were their order was actually allowed to have feelings as well as a bit more of a flexible philosophy. But the thing that really draws me to Kyle Katarn is his whole abilities aren't inherently good or evil. It's how you like use them. Is basically the exact quote from the game, if I'm not mistaken. But it just that always like stuck with me, especially when I was an edgy 12-year-old going back and replaying the game when I was going through the Jedi are awful, I hate the Jedi dark side phase.
I'm a gray Jedi. I use both sides of the Force.
No, by that point, I was just complete edgy. All I cared about was Force lightning.
Look, people would not have such a big problem with this if the dark side wasn't so badass.
It's true. It's true. Like, who doesn't want to be able to, like, you know, flash fry like the dude at work who's being annoying?
Karen, I'd like to see the manager. Zap.
Zap. But yeah, no. Plus, I mean, just with Kyle Katarn though. Back to the question. It kind of fits with how I would like to use the Force in combat. Obviously, the dark side, you're going to get a lot of combative powers. Uh, you know, choking people with the Force, lightning with the Force. Draining people with the Force. Like all those applications would be just so useful in combat that it's kind of like the logic behind it makes sense, because basically when you're using those powers, you're exerting your will on the Force to make it do those things. But I appreciate that Luke's order was able to kind of look past it and allow them to be used. Obviously, not like it's not like Luke Skywalker's students were dispatching like common criminals with like Force lightning, but it's very good that like a master like Kyle Katarn like sees the value of not necessarily studying both aspects, but using abilities like when they're useful. And
I used to be a really big proponent of that philosophy, but the dark side really scares me. Because I kind of view it as like as high, and that once you start using it, it kind of snares you. But also at the same time, by the same token, I don't want to completely exclude that from my studies, because know thy enemy.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Also, the last thing with Kyle Katarn for a master is he has a really cool gruff like dad voice, and him lecturing me wouldn't be so bad, I guess, if I slip up.
It'd be a lot less confusing than if you had Yoda as a master.
Yes, he does speak with like common English sentence structure.
To answer the question myself, I have selected a Qui-Gon Jinn. He's not the best lightsaber instructor.
Then you'd be stuck with Ataru.
Exactly. I would use him for his philosophical perspective, and then go train with Sinjaling. Even though Sinjaling's not that good either. I'll just go study by myself. It's fine. I think Qui-Gon offers a really unique perspective in the Jedi Order, and he holds the Force in a lot of reverence, kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi. But he's more of an instrument of it. Well, that's not fair. He and Kenobi have a really similar relationship. I would like the difference in perspective, because he's so different from the other Jedi, and I like to be well-rounded in philosophy, especially regarding the Force, because of how complicated it is. And also, with the way the Jedi Order is organized, I'm not sure how often I would agree or disagree with the Jedi Council, and Qui-Gon having this reputation of being defiant, I really think would help me in my perspective as a Jedi, and help me know when to question the Jedi, when to say they're wrong, when to do something else instead. Because especially in the case of stuff like the Mandalorian Wars, where the Jedi were just content with being inactive because they sensed a threat and the galaxy was essentially burning to the ground. I think he would be very useful in that regard. Again, not combatively speaking, that's my perspective.
His philosophy is it's definitely more interesting than the average like blind follower of like the Jedi code, which isn't a good way to put it, because you end up with really good Jedi like Obi-Wan who are completely dedicated to the Jedi Order itself and following the code and everything. One, it's more fun to like live outside the box than live inside it. The nice thing with Qui-Gon is he doesn't get super like out there about it, and he's not saying anything like outrageously bad where it's like, oh, okay, this guy might be a little loony.
He's not Anya Kira.
Like,
It's like,
Yes,
forsake your
yes,
name.
exactly.
You're nothing. He's like a less extreme version of her, and I really think he would help you to learn humility, reverence for something higher, like the Force, which I think is due in part a lot, especially in the case of Obi-Wan and his relationship with the Force, and how he uses Sarisu and basically becomes an instrument of it for it to work through him and basically make him invulnerable.
Yeah, his Qui-Gon's reverence for the Force, like it's kind of an interesting thing because you kind of get this, in a way, it's kind of like a family tree of views on the Force, where Qui-Gon held the Force like in very high esteem and held it basically in reverence. Obi-Wan kind of did the same thing, and then, well, and obviously Qui-Gon trained Obi-Wan, and then Obi-Wan trains Luke, and Luke also holds the Force in like very high esteem. Like when he's in a lot of the later Return of the Jedi expanded universe, he's always talking about how the Jedi need to work with the Force and never against it. And it's basically at the end of the last book of the New Jedi Order series, he says it, basically what he says is following with the Force good, going against the Force bad. And that's where you get a lot of the good, like, reverence for the Force. But then you also have that interesting dichotomy of Anakin really didn't care.
Not at all.
So literally, it's kind of one of those things where sometimes stuff will skip a generation, where you go from Obi-Wan, who is model Jedi, to Anakin, who is not so much, and then it skips Anakin and goes to Luke, who is basically model Jedi again.
Yeah, it's Anakin, even as a Jedi, kind of viewed the Force as almost as a Sith, and like viewing it as a weapon or a tool that he could use rather than the Force using him. And to go back to what you said about the family tree, I think it's very interesting how Qui-Gon's philosophy comes even though he was under the tutelage of someone like Dooku, who we don't really get much on his philosophy regarding the Force. When he becomes Darth Tyrannus, he's all about power mainly, and that's his discussion with Yoda in Dark Rendezvous. Just like the practical use of power and like overwhelming manipulative power. And I really wish we could have gotten something more between he and Qui-Gon and Qui-Gon's training to see how Qui-Gon could get something like that from Dooku and what Dooku's philosophy regarding that as a Jedi even was.
Yeah, it's basically what could have been.
Yeah, there's a Dooku novel out now where he's a Jedi. It's an audiobook, but I mean it's canon, and canon's just not a timeline I'm interested in, given what happens in the sequels. And he hasn't really been consistent as a character, especially in the Clone Wars, where he's just more or less a sadist. And they kind of turned him into like the mustache twirling, ha ha ha, evil, cackling villain.
Yeah, but to be fair, I think that's kind of a George Lucas thing, where I'm pretty sure that's what he wanted Dooku to be. I think it's either him or Grievous, one of the two. That's what it was. Oh, that's right, because then everyone's like, wait, Dooku exists.
I don't agree that Dooku was that. I think it's an oversimplification of Dooku's character, but at the same time, he has like Jack Squad in terms of character in the films. He's a very interesting character. I wish we had more development from him in Legends, because as far as it goes now, we have Dark Rendezvous, Labyrinth of Evil, and the Revenge of the Sith novelization. I guess Attack of the Clones too.
Then there's also his condescending remarks in the Jedi Path.
God, those are my favorite comments in that book. Just the one Jedi Master has like 6 arms. His master, Thames Cerulean's talking about how much of a spectacle it is, how amazing it is, and Dooku's just like, poor footwork, not impressed.
My favorite one, it's not like a snarky one or anything, but it's in that little book where it talks about curved hilt lightsabers, and Dooku just writes, interesting, underlined.
I wish I had more time to experiment with curved hilted lightsabers, because the concept does interest me, and Makashi is something I already go for, but water sabers, their hilts are 2 feet long and a foot thick. So I don't think it would really apply with those. And then saber forged is so expensive, so I really have no outlet for practicing with one.
I guess the only thing you could do is skip leg day and strictly work on your forearms, I guess. But to get slightly back on track from our tangent on how cool Dooku is, the next question is actually what Sith Master you would pick. So the exact opposite of what your Jedi Master would be. Um, like Kyle Katarn, well, I picked Darth Krayt, who, like Kyle Katarn, is both a master duelist and like a really powerful Force user. I also picked him because I for some reason it seems like it's the unpopular opinion everywhere online. I really enjoy.
Oh, do I?
I really enjoy the one Sith as a concept, with having many Sith serve the Sith Order as a whole, and I wouldn't terribly mind being a part of it because it's losing a lot of individuality would like suck, and I don't think I would look good with full body red and black tribal tattoos. Uh, but having access to a master like on Krayt's level would just completely make it worth it to me. Just his knowledge, like no big spoiler alert if you haven't read the 10-year-old comics, but Darth Krayt is Asherad Head, so he's been around since before the Clone Wars. He's trained as a Jedi, as a Tusken, a Tusken and then a Jedi and then a Tusken again, and then like his life experience is so interesting, and like getting to learn under someone who has that much like longevity. It's basically down to like Yoda and Kukruk are the only two characters that really like jump out at me as like especially long lived, where they've had all these different lives. But just I really like that about Krayt, and like it's kind of the one Sith. I kind of like how it's like a evil mirror version of the Jedi, where everyone's working towards a whole as opposed to themselves. And yeah, that's kind of contrarian to what everyone who likes the rule of two kind of views the Sith as. I think Krayt is definitely like a really good embodiment of the Sith ideal as well, where it's you're imposed like a lot of Sith look to impose their will, and Krayt imposes his will upon like thousands of beings and gets them to do what he wants. So getting to learn from the master who really takes that, in my opinion, and turns it up to like 13, where everything is his will, I guess would be very interesting. But for the most part, I do, like I said, I do find his philosophy interesting, but I just really appreciate a teacher who is well rounded as far as saber combat and force abilities go. So
I think especially Resurrected Krayt, he's one of the most powerful
yes,
force users in general of all time.
yeah, and plus being able to hopefully one day being able to will myself back from being dead, I guess would be pretty cool.
You gotta have Shadow Point. Hopefully. Obviously, I disagree. I do think that the one Sith is a really interesting concept, though. I do need to read Legacy, but it's interesting how Krayt essentially takes the first line of the Sith code, pieces lie, there's only passion. He essentially unites the entire Sith order under his passion,
Yeah.
which is like the prolonging of the Sith.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of cool that you also get a Sith who's more lawful evil than kind of more neutral or chaotic evil, I guess, in that way as well.
Mm-hmm. We have characters like Darth Ruin. Definitely would not want him to be my master, but I definitely would not want Krayt as my master, but I do think his philosophy is interesting, especially considering his roots. I mean, God, Krayt he turns like 20 years old this year, because he's as old as the Phantom Menace. Obviously not Darth Krayt, but Asherad Head. his character, and his coming up from him being a fallen Jedi. He's, like you said, he's twisting the Jedi Order and like flipping it, like it's the same side. It's a different side of the same coin. And the downside of that is that he has a bunch of followers that are weak as shit. And you see this with like Bane and his philosophy regarding the Force being fire or not fire. You can't just pass it on and have a bunch of torches. It's more of a poison, because if you spread it out, you dilute it. To loosely paraphrase what he's saying, but I do really enjoy the concept. Speaking of Rule of Two, the Sith Master that I have selected is Darth Plagueis, because I like immortality too. I just don't want to serve Darth Crane. He's not overtly evil. Like, he can definitely be very sadistic, especially towards politicians.
Well, and all his test tube experiments where he killed,
oh god, yeah.
he killed Venomous only to revive him, to kill him again to revive him.
Poor Venomous. But like the extent of the trauma Palpatine goes through is like getting choked once, because he definitely would have killed his family at some point. And if he didn't, he already hated them. So I mean, I don't really understand Palpatine's problem with that at the end of the book. But Plagueis, I feel like, would be a relatively easy life as a Sith. He's also a scientist, and the Force philosophically is very interesting to me, which is kind of why I picked Qui-Gon as well. And his experiments into the Force, and he's almost like the exact opposite of Qui-Gon, actually, which is pretty interesting given that I selected both of them, because instead of having reverence for the Force, Plagueis is essentially one of, if not the most, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. He forces his will on the Force more than any. He's one of the top whatever to do that. It's all about him and his will, and using the Force to his needs, as opposed to Qui-Gon's just absolute, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. And we got Anakin Skywalker because of it. But that's interpretation.
But yeah, no, you're definitely right with how he's. I would say that he imposes his will on the Force more than any other character in Star Wars, because he literally he manipulates midichlorians, which are the powerhouse of the Force. But no, like literally his entire thing with that is he's telling the Force to do exactly what he wants, and then the Force, pushes back, and then we get an Anakin.
The Force literally created Jesus because of this man.
Yeah, exactly. The Force was just it was tired of Plagueis' shit, so it created Space Jesus.
You want to make a dark side embodiment? Well, fuck you. I'll make a light side embodiment, but have him fuck up in the middle of his training. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. But
I can do this shit too.
Yeah, but don't phrase it like that, because then you get those people who think that balance is the most important thing in Star Wars.
George should have done a better job at explaining what balance actually was, because the only way you can rationalize it, in the films at least, is the light side is balance and the dark side is imbalance. But then you have the whole ideas of like yin and yang and shit like that. It just, balance is the wrong word to use.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think that the prequels would have been served better if balance only referred to people standing on one leg, as opposed to a state the Force needs to be in.
I do think it is used well in KOTOR 2, though, with Kreia, because either interpretation makes sense with Kreia's philosophy of the Force having a will and the Force invoking its will on all life, like trying to seek balance, because either it's trying to get rid of the Sith, and life is just bringing up the Sith again, because the dark side is essentially emotion taken to the nth degree. And if you look at it the other way, where you need to balance the scales, if the Sith get too powerful, the Jedi are going to rise up, and it's kind of what they're doing with the sequels. So I guess that's a contradiction.
That'll never quite make sense to me, but that's a whole other thing for a whole other time.
That is
But
huge rabbit hole.
yeah, but before we go down that rabbit hole, in keeping with the Sith here, the next question is, what would your Darth name be? It took me forever and ever and ever to find anything that sounded like cool, because like picking your Star Wars vehicle, picking like your Darth name, your Sith name, it's literally just rule of cool, like just whatever sounds cool. And but I tried to be like overly deep and
I did too.
and skip over the Futurama takes on it, Darth Sploder and Darth Erderer and stuff. But I went back to kind of my roots. My on my father's side, for the majority it's Finnish, so I played around in Google Translate and finally came up with Darth Valtus, which Valtus translates to authority in Finnish, which I thought once I saw it, it like clicked in my head, like the hamster wheel finally started turning, and I was like, okay, yeah, this complements like the whole me being in the one Sith perfectly, because the one Sith are all about, well, Crate is all about imposing his like version of authority and his version of order on the galaxy. And in my little OC headcanon, where I basically have Darth Niles' position, I thought it like fit in being in the one Sith. And
especially if you acted as like an enforcer for Darth Crate.
Exactly, and that's immediately where I thought of like Darth Nile and Darth Talon. But more or less, at the end of the day, it's what all Sith names are, and it's literally just rule of cool. I doubt you know John Ostrander or Joe Ostrand. Oh God, the fellow who wrote the Legacy comics. Can't think of his first name for some reason. I doubt when he was naming Darth Talon and Nile and Warlock, he was really delving deeper when George Lucas came up with, Darth Sidious and Plagueis and all
Sidious, Insidious, Plagueis, Plague,
yeah,
Nihilism. It doesn't have to be too deep.
Yeah, literally. Especially like the movie ones, like where Sidious is, like you said, it's just insidious. Or when you go to KOTOR, it Nihilus, Nihilus. Well, I always thought it was from like nihilism, but annihilate or Darth Treya is like.
Actually, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Chris Everlund recently did an interview, and he attributed it both to nihilism and annihilation.
Oh yeah, no, because I always thought nihilism because nihilism, and then you get Darth Treya, which is just like, I think
Betrayal.
Betrayer. Like Sith names could be as deep or as surface level, and I basically, for me, it was just one that was kind of both. But
generally, you want to strike a balance, but I really think you did.
I was really glad the way it turned out, and I guess Google Translate is just everybody's Sith friend.
And that's exactly what I used.
Excellent.
The Darth name I have selected is Darth Enixus, Enixus, which comes from it's Latin, and it can translate roughly to zealous, or being born, struggle to be born, or struggle to be brought up. I'm mostly going with zealous here, because I think as a Sith, the most important part of the Sith code to me is pieces of either as a late passion, but specifically there is only passion, because passion is probably the biggest driving force in my life. My life is pretty much defined by the things I'm passionate about. If I can't talk to you about the things I'm passionate about, our relationships automatically lesser, because it encompasses so much of my own personality and the things I'm interested in. And it's very difficult for me to keep up a conversation otherwise. But it's also it's not inherently bad. Like, you could argue that Sith philosophy isn't inherently bad. It's probably very selfish, but there is only passion isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can have passion for things that are actually very good, like passion for your lover or for just creative works you're interested in, and or a passion to make the world a better place or some shit like that. And generally, it just gets muddied with how the dark side works. But I think passion would be the biggest driving force for me as a Sith, whatever the end goal would be. Plus, it just sounds cool. It has an accent.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds cool, but for some reason, I don't know why, but something that starts with an E doesn't seem very intimidating. I don't know. That just stuck in my
Shit, now I have to change it.
Spell with like an I or something instead. I don't know.
I might do that.
But
I don't think there is there an E. Is there a Darth whose name starts with an E?
that's what I was thinking. Like, that's just me. Like, E for some reason isn't like it's not an intimidating like letter. I guess what's the
Now Q is really intimidating.
Q? Yes, of course.
Look, it's better than Nox.
That's true. That's true. That seems like something that a 15-year-old named Kyle would name his Darth Lord.
Well, that's the name of the Sith Inquisitor if you go full dark side.
Yeah, that's
like Darth Maul is like Darth Nox. It's like the Darth Vader scene in Revenge of the Sith, but so much worse. Because it both comes out of nowhere and the name just sounds terrible.
Well, isn't one of the other options like Darth Imperius?
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then I think there's a third one, because there's one for light, neutral, and dark.
Imperius, I think, is the neutral. I could be wrong.
I don't know. That one actually does it. It sounds very good, but it was already taken potentially, so obviously I had to skip it.
It's okay. You can just ignore the Old Republic. A lot of people do.
That's
okay. Here it is. It's Imperius for light side, Oculus for neutral, and Nox for dark.
Oh, see, Oculus wouldn't work for me because in real life it wouldn't work, because all I think of when I hear that word is Oculus Rift, the VR headset.
It wouldn't work for me because I can't fucking see.
That's true. If I am bereft of my glasses, I'm blind after like a couple, maybe a dozen meters.
Shit, now I really want to mirror Luca, Sith Inquisitor, named Darth Oculus.
Well, it would basically just be Jarek. All right, but on to the next question.
Where are we?
Yeah, I was gonna say on to the next question. We're talking about Mira Luca and being without glasses, but the next question is your favorite movie. This is like a hands down. Don't even have to think about it for any time at all. My favorite Star Wars movie is, and will like probably until I'm like 6 feet under the ground, is Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Like, ever since I was a little kid, it's been my favorite. Like, Mark Hamill, James Earl Jones, and Ian McDiarmid brought like their like A plus 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 game. Like, all the throne room scenes are like, if like the big super cut of them you can find on YouTube, like they're my favorite scenes in the entire series. And I appreciate that it brings a good, happy ending. Everything is like wrapped up at the end of the 6 movies. Vader's redeemed. the Empire is crippled. In I think both canon and Legends, it's like crippled. It's not like fully destroyed. But as far as the general movie audience is going to be concerned, it's destroyed. And I think the most important thing is that Luke takes up, the mantle of like a fully fledged Jedi Knight that Anakin kind of left behind. He kind of takes it, and in one continuity he runs with it, and in the other continuity he runs with it, drops it, and then gets off of the track.
Well, did it surprise you?
In not in the best way, but I think that gets
Well, if it's surprising, it's good, and you can't argue that.
yeah, I think that gets brought up in the next entry, but
On the more positive side of things.
yeah, but on the more positive side of things, no, just all the action in it is still very good. It still has that great sense of original trilogy, like the practical effects. Some of it looks a little jumpy now, like when the ATST gets crushed by the two logs. Some of it looks a little jumpy, and then some stuff does bring it down a little bit. Harrison Ford was definitely kind of had the idea of C's get degrees, that kind of mentality.
Well, they didn't really give him a whole lot to work with in the first place.
That is true.
As far as character goes,
they did kind of make Han kind of just a generic good guy, which I guess it was a logical destination for his character, but he kind of
I think it's satisfying enough. it's. I would have preferred if he died.
Well, no, because then you
Well, not in the context of the Legends, because I do like how his relationship with Leia goes off, but I feel like Han dying would have been a really good oomph to end the original trilogy with.
Yeah, that's true. Also, a thing that I don't think gets brought up enough today is Episode 6 has a lot of Lando, and I love the character of Lando Calrissian. Like, I always have. And obviously, like, it has Lando as a good guy, and Billy D. Williams seems to just be very happy playing the role, which I think he has another great performance in that film, aside from Mark Hamill as well. And I guess another opinion, that is probably on the more unpopular side. I don't really the Ewoks don't bother me. It might be because I grew up with them and they're essentially 4-foot high teddy bears. But I like the cheesy idea of the inferior kind of technology, beating the bad guys. But there's also the fact that there's one legion of stormtroopers versus an entire planet of Ewoks.
I don't mind the Ewoks either, but I do think it would have been better with Wookiees.
Well, see, the thing that would kind of get me, and this is, of course, retroactively knowing that the Wookiees aren't like at an Ewok level of technology, like we see in Episode 3, and of course in the EU. I wouldn't like if the Wookiees were at that basically like caveman level technology that the Ewoks are at. I think it would be a disservice to their species because like Chewbacca is the co-pilot of a starship.
I think you could rationalize it with Chewbacca's origin and like have him just like shipped off whatever young, or like he learned how to work with this technology, whereas the Wookiees have been isolated as a species. But I think that is actually the reasoning. George Lucas didn't want them to be Wookiees because we'd already seen Chewbacca working on chips and doing the like.
Yeah, I don't know what he was thinking.
To answer the question myself, it is also Return of the Jedi. I agree almost wholeheartedly with what you said. It's probably the most compelling Star Wars movie, I would say.
It would either have to be, honestly, like not try to be like an OT like fanboy or purist or anything. I love the prequels too, but I think compelling wise, I think like between the two, I think it's kind of a tie between Empire and Return of the Jedi to be most compelling. But
Empire's definitely more shocking, but I think there's a a lot more emotional resonance with Return of the Jedi. Just on virtue of being a conclusion on its own.
Yeah, that's true.
But this is the first time we really see Vader as a character, as opposed to being. I mean, don't get me wrong, Vader's fantastic in the other two movies, but this is the first time we really get to look into what's actually going on inside his head. We got hints of it in Empire, but here he's like a full-fledged character with thoughts and feelings, and the conflict you see in him without him having to say no, the Blu-ray remakes, which is honestly I can't watch Return of the Jedi anymore on Blu-ray because of that edited scene. But it's also one of my favorite reasons as to why this is my favorite movie, because that scene is where he's watching Luke get electrocuted by Palpatine. It evokes so much emotion without a word from Vader. Like, you can just look at him and see him looking between Palpatine and Luke, and you really see the conflict in him without having to look at his face. It's beautiful visual storytelling without the need of ridiculous dialogue, which George rectified later on, you could say. But the film in general is just, it's very emotional. I don't mean like sad, or but it's definitely it's a great conclusion. It's definitely very flawed. There are a lot of things I would change with the film to make it better, but I do love it. And Palpatine is one of my favorite characters. He's probably my favorite character out of the original 6 films, or well, actually, out of all the films at this point. But yeah, that's all my reasons. Oh God, like you said earlier, the music in Episode 6 is fantastic. When Luke is going full rage mode on Vader, that is, I had that saved to several of my playlists on YouTube because, God, that music is so good.
Yeah, no, but you did lie. You said Return of the Jedi isn't sad. Yoda dies, so you're wrong.
Shit, you're kind of right. It is sad. But when I said emotional, I didn't mean like there's a tearjerker. I mean, in ways it is, but
well, you did say sad.
I meant there's a whole shit ton of emotions.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, no, I definitely understood what you meant there. But I mean, just all the interactions between all the characters, they all make sense. And yeah, it does get a little clunky. Like, obviously there are criticisms. There's criticisms for like every single movie that's ever existed, but obviously you get some stuff where like you kind of get the ham-fisted like confirmation of Luke's parentage from Obi-Wan. You know, the whole, because obviously George didn't originally write it where Vader was Luke's father, so they did the whole, you know, certain point of view thing, and it makes sense. It's like a satisfying way to like tie it together, and then he kind of rams Leia being Luke's sister in there as well, which definitely, no matter what he says, was definitely not the case.
The certain point of view thing does not. I actually really like it.
Oh no,
it's the Leia one.
I really like the certain point of view thing, but I could definitely see how people, you know, could, you know, take that as, you know, criticism where, you know, George didn't write it this way, because I'm sure everybody knows George didn't originally plan for it to be, you know, a trilogy and there was going to be more.
Mm-hmm.
It does seem kind of clunky when you look at it, you know, from just a 3-movie perspective. But to like more deeper lore fans and stuff, where you kind of get it, where you know, you kind of get a little more of Obi-Wan's motivations, it definitely all makes sense.
Well, I mean, you would have a really damn hard time trying to convince Luke to be a Jedi if you told him what actually happened.
Yeah, exactly. Your father killed a bunch of children with this lightsaber. Like that meme is basically why he would tell Luke who
exactly
was. But
my problem is with the whole Leia thing, because God, that was poorly executed. he just kind of throws it out there, but given what you know between them, Luke wanted to fuck her, and that is very uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, I mean,
And
obviously,
they kiss.
like it's totally rectified, and you're supposed to just think it away because they didn't know, and maybe that flew back in the 80s, I guess. But in today's day and age, where you grow up and basically before you're like 10 years old that Luke and Leia are siblings. Most people know it nowadays before they even watch episode 5.
Yeah.
But no.
I think George got high one night and he wrote that part of the script and just completely forgot that they kissed in it. But I mean, it's better than some things that happen in real life. I could point out a few articles.
Yeah, let's keep those out of it because I don't want the FBI finding those. And let's move on to the next question of what's your least favorite movie? Mine is, and I'm gonna try and not make this a poo-poo on it thread, but mine is The Last Jedi. For me, it fluctuates between The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens. But
I was about to say you changed your answer.
yes. It is at the moment The Last Jedi, and that's because I watched it recently. My friends and I, we had a big over several days. We had watched all the current Star Wars movies that are out, and when it got to watching The Last Jedi, I don't know if it was because I was fatigued because it's a 15-minute drive from my apartment to my friend's townhouse. But I wasn't in the mood for it. I knew I don't like 95% of the stuff in it that happens, which is obviously subjective. But Luke's character for me doesn't match with what we had seen before at all. Plus, and I will attribute to some of it. My expectations were high from reading of Luke making his own Jedi Academy and not being a sad sack.
I don't think your expectations were high; they were just natural. We just got completely sidelined.
Yeah, that could be true as well. But I mean, it. But one of the things upon this last viewing that really bothered me was Chewbacca is literally just a side note character for some jokes with the Porgs, and that for some reason, like, and granted, I did watch it. It was a couple weeks ago before Peter Mayhew passed away, but like it did bother me that like Chewbacca, this like super loyal character that like nobody on the planet dislikes, is a side note character who is basically comic relief by that point. And I mean, Snoke is killed in like a rather lame way, and I mean, to go back to Luke, like Luke Skywalker, like the great Jedi hero, dies because he uses the Force. It's bogged down by the main chase plot, which I thought was boring to me on repeat viewings, and drug even further down the negative hole by Canto Bight. Which even a lot of people like my friends, like they don't dislike the sequels, but there are things in them they dislike, and it's almost universal with people I know, and even a lot of people I interact with online who say that they love the sequels and the direction that it's going. Like the common consensus seems to be Canto Bight is just not good. But I mean, that's all I'm really going to say on it. I don't want to turn it into a poo-poo the Last Jedi and the sequels thread because it's a rabbit hole.
Okay, well, I do. So getting started on. To preface this, I did not hate The Force Awakens when it came out. In fact, I loved it. It was probably my favorite Star Wars movie because it rode on so much nostalgia and it was blinding me. My least favorite film is The Last Jedi, like you, because it takes a lot of the flaws with The Force Awakens, and I do blame The Force Awakens for a lot of the flaws in The Last Jedi, being that the galaxy has basically been reset. We're at the same point where we were in A New Hope, and everybody we loved is now a miserable failure. It's very the sequels in general are very nihilistic, despite how many times they say hope in the script, which rivals that of Rogue One. But The Last Jedi just fails as a film for me, not even as a Star Wars film. It's like Rian Johnson took all the flaws with The Force Awakens and put gas on it and watched it burn. And it's not even properly executed, like, especially with Luke. Whether or not you agree whether this makes sense for him to become what he is, and even the catalyst for this decision where he tries to kill his nephew in his sleep, even that scene alone is not properly executed because it's just spouted as exposition. This is a beloved character who you're trying to convince the audience that this character who believed in Darth Vader and the goodness of Darth Vader is going to try to kill Kylo Ren in his sleep because he had a dark vision that was the worst thing he's seen, apparently, even though he's been toe-to-toe with Darth Vader and the Emperor together in the same room. But he rationalizes this through narration. We don't see the vision. We don't know what Luke is feeling at that time. We're being told. And it breaks a fundamental rule with a film, that the show don't tell things. So already you've lost me there. Then he wants to be a miserable failure and let everybody die. So not only has he tried to kill a family member who's asleep, and his beloved nephew, and his beloved sister and best friend's son, but now he doesn't care anymore. Until Rey tells him that the First Order is doing bad shit. Like, what did he expect? Going back to what I said earlier, I don't think it's a good film. So many characters don't make sense. So many arcs don't make sense. Just as film criticism in general, not even as Star Wars. It just fails on almost every level for me. Even like the highlights of the film, like the hyperspace ram. It really doesn't make sense. Like, why haven't they been doing this before? Like, even if they rationalize it, like Paul Hidalgo does on Twitter, that it wouldn't work with like an X-Wing or some shit. You could definitely do a calculated strike through the Death Star's laser and make it not function anymore with an X-Wing. Why are we not doing this? Nobody has thought that ramming ships, especially in the context of the prequels where the Separatists are just droids. Why are they not using this? It doesn't make sense. Oh, okay, rant over.
Excellent. But I mean, yeah, no, I definitely agree with a lot of what you said. Like you mentioned Luke, who's a beloved character. Like for me, and like I'm sure a huge like chunk of like Star Wars fans, like Luke Skywalker is like the quintessential. Like he's the Star Wars character. Like he's the character that obviously in the original trilogy, like he's the protagonist. It's his story, just like the prequels are Anakin's story. And just to see him reduced from, the highs that we get to see him, even just excluding the expanded universe, if we're just going by the movies, seeing him go from this absolute high of he redeemed his father before he died, and then the next time we see him, he's on an island and has been gone for however many years. It's just like I get it, like they're trying to go for something the same but different considering he trains Rey, but like just him on an island where he went to die is a complete 180 plus another 360 from Luke Skywalker's character, in my opinion. And I just can't get behind it. I was hoping in The Last Jedi we would get to see some Luke, and it's not I wanted him to come in and single-handedly save the day, but like just something more than what we got. And unfortunately we won't be able to get that. And I've come to terms with it, but just seeing my favorite Star Wars character reduced from eternal optimist to pessimist times 100, it's very jarring to me, and I just can't get behind it personally.
I don't blame you. I expected going into The Last Jedi for them to rewrite Luke as someone like Kreia, and I was petrified of it because I didn't want Rian Johnson to get praise for ripping off, in my opinion, the greatest Star Wars character of all time. I didn't want Chris Avalon to get shafted in terms of credit for that because, oh, it's in the film, so therefore it's popular and therefore it is unique. Like, people obsessed over, oh, the first female Star Wars villain, even though, we got it in episode 2 with Sam Wessel. But there have been female villains in Star Wars since the original trilogy. Lumaya, the Dark Ventress. There's so many, and they're all better characters than Phasma. I don't understand this. But going back to Luke, I was terrified they were going to do that with him. Instead, we got a very poorly executed version of that. Because with KOTOR 2, Kreia's criticisms of the Jedi were actually shown that. We see what she's talking about. In The Last Jedi, Luke just spouts some nonsense about Sidious rising or the Jedi being hubris. He doesn't expand on anything. He just throws out these random adjectives and expects the audience to understand, and it makes no sense. I just wish Rian Johnson had established it, because this Luke could perhaps have worked for me, but the execution is just awful.
Yeah, I've said my piece on The Last Jedi.
Please move on.
Yeah.
I'll go on for another 30 minutes.
Anyways, back to more positive territory again. Favorite soundtrack. For me, again, it's Return of the Jedi. The music that plays in the throne room, it's just perfect storytelling through the music. Like, it fits the situation perfectly. And then, like you had said earlier, the crescendo of the music as Luke kind of starts seeing red and kind of goes full on against Vader after Leia gets threatened, and it sets him off, and you get that part where he yells "never," and turns on his lightsaber, and then beats Vader back, which is like one of the only times that he does that. I mean, he gets like a kick on him earlier in the fight, and in episode 5 he gets a couple hits in on him, but it's the first time you ever see Vader driven back physically, and the music perfectly emphasizes that. It's like hopeful, but a lot of it kind of like, listening to it kind of also has as far as like the strings and the horns go, it kind of has a darker undertone, which for me, listening to it anyways, it kind of, it makes sense, because there's the high parts to it, and then at the same time there are these parts with the strings, and maybe it's horns. I don't know. I'm not in orchestra anymore. But no, you get a really good kind of dichotomy from it, as well as just it's kind of greatest hits of the original trilogy as far as music goes. And yes, before the question even gets asked, I do enjoy Yub Nub as opposed to Victory Celebration. That literally, the only reason I can think of is because that's the version I heard watching it on VHS in 1999 when I was 4 years old.
Well, you're just biased and can't see the objective truth.
I refuse to budge on the point of Yub Nub.
I respect your tenacity.
It's just it makes more sense to me that the Ewoks are singing their happy winning song rather than an Ewok is playing the flute. I think the thing I also enjoy about Yub Nub is it's the Ewoks singing it at their party. When you get Victory Celebration, who's playing the flute?
It makes more sense in universe.
Yeah. Oh, Yub Nub is definitely, you can't change my mind that is what was going on at the celebration.
It's just that I think Victory Celebration, it feels more like an accomplishment. Like, it's grander, whereas Yum Num is very small and contained, and I don't think it works as well, especially in the context of all 6 movies.
We'll see.
It's very tame to me,
I
but I do agree with.
I guess the
Luke thing.
small scale thing makes more sense because in the theatrical and VHS releases, you don't get the shots of Naboo and Coruscant and Tatooine. So I guess that also, I guess, makes more sense in the small scale as well.
Oh yeah, but I do agree with what you said about the Luke one. No, I don't even remember what the name of the track is. There's like a 4 Battle of Indoors on the official soundtrack. It's like Battle of Endor 1, and there's 2 parts of it, and then there's Battle of Endor 2, and there's 2 parts of it, so I can never tell. But that is one of my favorite scores in Star Wars. My top 5 easily. It's very solemn. It's not really intense, but it's very dramatic, and it evokes a lot of emotions. But to answer the question myself, my favorite soundtrack is Revenge of the Sith, because I believe Revenge of the Sith was whatever the opposite of a magnum opus is for John Williams and Star Wars. It plays basically as Star Wars greatest hits. It has elements from all the other soundtracks while also adding in really cool new shit, like Battle of the Heroes is one of the most famous Star Wars songs out there. It has Duel of Fates in it, and it also adds in something I think is really underrated in Star Wars soundtracks, but the really ambient, kind of softer scores, like Padme's Ruminations or Palpatine's Seduction, where it has, or Palpatine's teachings, especially when he's talking about Plagueis, and these hums and really deep, resonant. It just drips with atmosphere, and it's so good. And damn, I love it.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, Revenge of the Sith definitely. I would say it definitely has my second favorite soundtrack, and it's basically because of all the things you listed. But some of it, and some of the things that the biggest thing I don't like about the prequel music is sometimes it gets a little too bombastic. Like that's one reason I'm not a huge fan of Duel of the Fates. It's a little too, obviously in the context it fits, but you couldn't really put it over, say, something from like like it wouldn't work like in Return of the Jedi, because it a lot of that stuff isn't as high paced and stuff. But
Oh, definitely.
But that's one thing that always kind of keeps the prequel soundtracks down for me a little bit is, like, yeah, there are some great subtle pieces like when Palpatine's talking about Plagueis and a lot of those, but then you get the not necessarily over the top because it all fits in the universe of Star Wars, but it's just a little too bombastic for me, and that's what always keeps it down. Because in my opinion, with the Return of the Jedi soundtrack, obviously, with this you would have to replace Yub Nub with Victory Celebration, but you could take the Return of the Jedi soundtrack, in my opinion, and put it over any of the other movies, and it still fits.
Possibly, but contrastingly, maybe not the prequels, because it's not just the music in the prequels that's really bombastic. I mean, you have the fight with Anakin and Obi-Wan where they're like swinging like Tarzan.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I did look it up, and the track from when Luke attacks Vader, it's without being able to go in and listen, it's either Battle of Endor 2 or Final Duel into the Death Star. So it's either one of the two. After we're done,
See,
I need to confirm it because I just need to know.
See, when I look up this shit, I either look up Luke's Fury or the Final Duel, and it usually comes up, and I'm just content with that.
Exactly. If I want to look it up, but in order to find the track name, I typed in Return of the Jedi track that plays when Luke fights Vader. But I think that should about do it for soundtrack. And on to probably my second favorite question from the questionnaire, and that is, if you could write a novel in the Star Wars universe, what would it be about? Mine 100%, and it was literally just a random thought one day when I was sitting in a chemistry class in college, bored out of my mind. I thought of, like, I started thinking about Knights of the Old Republic 2 because I was probably just trying to think of something interesting that would keep my mind like alive, and it stuck in my head. And this was maybe a year after I read the to put it very, very mildly, underwhelming Revan novel. But I started thinking and connect like dots, and one thing I could never figure out, and to this day has never been explained in the EU, is how do the Jedi get from being 99% destroyed in KOTOR 2 to apparently back in the Jedi Temple on Coruscant in by the time of the Revan novel. And that just it always interested me because obviously in the base game of KOTOR 2, you get Krea's predictions of the future and how the Exile's companions are going to go on to found like this new or rebuild the Jedi Order, I should say, as opposed to found a new order. But that always interested me because you get the characters like Disciple and Handmaiden specifically, who, when Krea gives her visions of the future, have like super important roles, and then are never mentioned ever again, of course, because KOTOR 3 never existed, unfortunately.
And
but
the Revan novel just shafts everything that happened in KOTOR 2.
Basically, yeah. But she says that Disciple is going to sit on the Jedi Council, and Handmaiden is going to basically be Atris and become the chief historian. And I think it would be very interesting to see those characters and the Exile rebuilding the Order.
I would just like to see a compelling conclusion to Revan's story in general.
That would be great too, but like I wouldn't even mind in the context of what's established, just seeing how the Jedi rebuilt, because again, it would be, I loved the stories of post Return of the Jedi of Luke rebuilding the Jedi, so I guess it would kind of be that, but 4,000.
It could be a different take.
Yeah, it would be a different take, exactly, because the Exile, it would make sense if the Exile like took things that Krea said and Krea's criticisms and tried to fix them, which obviously it would be very interesting to see that transition of how they go from like basically arrogant like know-it-alls who sit in the council chamber to like the Rusan era, where they're basically like generals, like all of them, like they're basically by that point a militant order. Like it'd be very interesting to see if maybe the Exiles rebuilding of the Order like contributed to that, because obviously the Exile lived through this time where 99% of the Jedi Order are like destroyed or in hiding. And
I agree, especially with influence being such a big part of the Exile's story.
Yes, exactly, because the Exile was just a born natural leader, and seeing how the Exile would lead the Jedi into the future, I guess, had always been an interesting thought to me, and a position that we never got to see. It's basically I don't remember how long it is between KOTOR 2 and the Revan novel, but it's a fair amount of time that the Jedi kind of reestablished themselves very quickly. So it would definitely have been interested to see explored. But that's basically my take on the novel, without basically explaining my like fan theory on how it all happened.
We'll have to do a discussion on the Revan novel later.
Yeah.
But I do like the ideas you presented. I think it would be a compelling story. I'd like to read it, but unfortunately there's no New Legends content, so fan fiction it is. As for me, I'm kind of wishy-washy with this. I kind of change all the time as new ideas come and go. But what I've kind of stuck with, because I'm not brave enough to write a Dooku novel, is a novel depicting two Sith in the Rule of Two era. Because I would like to see some of the machinations of the Sith in that era, especially why it took so damn long, because it takes them 1,000 years to regain control of the Republic. Or not regain, but gain the control of the galaxy. I don't know if I would necessarily write about Darth Gravid, but one thing I'm interested in, and I don't think Gravid's species is ever identified. I know his Padawan is a Twi'lek, but going back to Given and what I said earlier about force augmentation, I think it would be very interesting to see how that would apply itself to Gravid's mentality, because Given are very numeric, they're very mathematical, and Gravid was swayed by light side teachings, which are very compassionate, and it's kind of like a separation from logic to emotion. And I would like to see how that came about. And I think it's a very interesting story to tell. I feel kind of bad about taking that from James Luceno, because I really want him to see it. I really want to see him write that story too, but I wouldn't mind writing it either. I think it could be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, also the Given kind of work as a Sith species because they look like skulls.
They look scary. It's okay.
They look spooky. Yeah, I think that again it's an interesting concept. Like basically anyone could take anything and in Star Wars and find a way to write about it, but I think the ideas presented here are definitely interesting. And if I had the writing skills, I would write my story, but I definitely don't think I could do like justice the way James Luceno or Matthew Stover could. So,
God, I mean, they're like gods in their own element, and they're something else.
yeah, I'll leave it up to my weird little ideas I have in my head. But next question's pretty short. For me, anyways. It's, do you collect figures? No, I have 2 up on my bookshelf. It's the Black Series Jaina Solo, and I bought an action figure literally just to hang up on my wall as decoration at my second apartment, and it's action figure of Luke from Dark Empire, which is one of my favorite comics. But obviously, I still have tucked away at my dad's in a drawer somewhere. I have all the action figures I had when I was a kid, but they're not really collected. Some of them are like broken, lots of snapped lightsabers. But as far as collecting those, no. I'll probably at some point when I feel like spending $20, because for some reason action figures cost $20 now because I'm old. I'll probably buy the Darth Revan one just because Revan is a very cool, interesting character. But what I do collect is Ultra Sabers. If anyone listening to this is unaware, they're basically just dueling grade lightsabers. I've got, at the moment, 6 of them. I just collect them, and I'll go to my buddies sometimes, and we'll have some drinks and go beat each other up with these big, like, plastic sticks, basically, that light up. But I'm much more, I guess, to kind of morph the question a little bit. I was more concerned with collecting the novels. I own every adult EU novel. I have a lot of the comics as well, both mostly in digital form. And I guess my next goal would be to collect the young adult and children's novels. But that's basically summarizes my collection. It's a pretty short and sweet question, I guess.
Yeah, it's books take up less room, I would say.
Yeah, that's also very true.
I used to collect them. They were bought for me a lot. very few or none of them are in mint condition anymore. A lot of the card backs have been bent and whatnot, but I do buy them occasionally when I see something I'm interested in, but I haven't really recently because all the new content mainly has been the sequels. And I bought stuff for The Force Awakens, but I did not buy anything for The Last Jedi at all. Mostly because the toy line just sucks. Love Adam Driver, but I really don't want his his helmetless action figure. I really don't want Rose either. I might get the Revan one eventually, because I do love Revan too. But most of the stuff I look at now are older figures, like the comic book packs, especially because I love those so much. I wish the Sherrod hit combo pack wasn't so expensive. It's like $80 on Amazon.
I was gonna say I'd definitely love to get some of those one day, but yeah, no, it's easy to justify $15-20 for something that you're just gonna look at, but once it gets to 80, it's not like a metal statue or anything. It's literally just a box with a couple things in it. But while it's cool, I don't know if it's $80 cool yet.
No, definitely not. Unless you just have that money to spend on nothing.
Yeah, literally, like, but then there are Ultra Sabers to buy.
Exactly. While you were buying action figures, I was studying the blade.
Of course. You have Ultra Sabers as well. I know you do. I've seen pictures of them.
Yes. I'm actually wanting to get another. I've spent way too much money on these things.
Oh, I when people ask me how much I've spent on them, I say a couple hundred, and that I just keep it at that.
That's wise. I probably spent about the same. I'm content with the one sound saber I have. I will probably never buy another one again. A sound that is. I do want to get a curved one eventually when I have money to spend on that stuff, and I do want to get a cheaper one so that matches one I have now, so I could connect them and make a saber staff.
Of course, preferably a green saber staff.
Oh, it is red.
Oh, how droll. But going from a very short question to a much more open-ended.
Oh god, this one's loaded.
Yeah, I tried to condense everything in my little notes here. I tried to condense it, but God knows it'll get expanded as I start. In your opinion, what is the best thing about the EU? For me, it's that it expanded the universe, and it is quick as an answer as that is. I love how it did it without becoming a mess of continuity errors. Like, it would have been so easy for each author to write their own thing, write their own, standalone novel or trilogy, and it just disregards everything, and it's its own thing, and it not fit into a timeline. I love that it isn't a timeline. You can go all the way from Dawn of the Jedi 25,000 years before Episode 4, all the way to the end to the novel Crucible, which takes place a few decades afterwards. I think it's in the 40s. I really should know this with how much I love post Return of the Jedi. But you can go all the way there, and yeah, there are, continuity errors here and there, but like for the most part, it's nothing a short snippet of dialogue in a retcon that fixes it later. Like, it was never anything where like a novel said that Anakin Skywalker never existed or something, and then they have to try and reconcile that or something. But just
not that anything's ever that extreme anyway.
Exactly. Like, a lot of it'll be like the one that always sticks out to me is that in the Thrawn trilogy, when Captain Pelion definitely makes it seem like he fought against clones in the Clone Wars, despite the fact that the clones were the good guys, which at the time Zahn didn't know, because nobody except for the tiny little spark in the back of George Lucas's head knew that at that point. So then it never gets addressed by Pelion in any of the later stories chronologically, but then he makes an appearance during the Clone Wars, and he's fighting against rogue clones. Like, and there it fixes it. Like it's as simple as that. It took about a decade, but that got resolved, and it's never stuff usually more major than that. Like, and obviously there are going to be any errors, like sometimes a character's eye color, hair color gets mixed up between authors, but
Lightsaber color.
lightsaber color, which is actually just, to me, more egregious than like someone saying Luke Skywalker has brown eyes or something.
It pisses me off. I wanted Plo Koon to have an orange one. They made it blue.
Or you end up with Tales of the Jedi, where everybody's lightsaber color changes every other, it seems like, page almost. But just all that stuff, and I guess to try and like summarize this a bit more, the EU also, it got to give stories that movies never that the movies never would have covered. Stuff like the Clone Commandos, Darth Bane, the entirety of Tales of the Jedi, and in my opinion, some of the best stuff from the expanded universe, which is the Knights of the Old Republic games. Like, the movies never would have touched on any of those. None of it ever would have existed if it weren't for the EU. And like, just the fact that we got to get those stories because they aren't movies, I think is just some of the best stuff about it. I couldn't pick one thing. I cheated.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would argue there's stories in the EU that are better than the films.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, there's KOTOR. I mean, there's the Thrawn trilogy, the Darth Bane trilogy, and especially Plagueis.
Excluding Dynasty of Evil.
Minus Dynasty of Evil, but then we get Plagueis, which basically fixes a lot of the prequel stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. I initially did not like midichlorians, but Plagueis rectified that. I actually need to reread it. It's been a while. The best part of the EU for me is basically everything you said. I have a few words written down as notes: connectivity, tapestry of story, and timeline with butterfly effects. So essentially, what you said. Everything that happens in the EU, at least the major events, you start splitting hairs when you talk about individual small scale things. You have stories like Plagueis, where Bane, even though he's centuries dead, it's been a millennia, he's very present in that story. You can see his influence. You can see this impact that this character who only had novels and a comic book has on the overall story of Star Wars. How invasive it is, how influential he is as a character. It weaves this kind of like tapestry of story where everything has a little bit of influence and everything really matters. And it like overarcs millennia. Like you have Crate, for example, whose first appearance was in Star Wars Outlander in 1999, and he has a story that goes well beyond Return of the Jedi. And you can see all the impacts of the things that he's gone through affecting the story that he creates and the empire he creates later on in life and his own progression and change. It's very what's a positive word I could think of?
Vast.
It's a vast story, and it all complements one another. And there are inconsistencies and retcons and the like, but in the end, you're getting this overarching story that all blends together into one massive narrative that continues on a single timeline. Well, you have like the Star Wars Tales stuff like that that's not canon and whatnot, but you get my meaning.
Oh yeah, and yeah, as far as like you mentioned, like the longevity of a character like Ashrat Het and then Crate. The last issue of the first volume of Star Wars Legacy came out in 2011. So Crate's character has this big progression of over a decade, to where he finally dies.
It's like a film. It's like Vader's arc over the original trilogy, because I mean they're out now, but like, what was Star Wars was 1977. What was Return of the Jedi?
2005.
Return of the Jedi was not 2005.
Oh, I thought you said Revenge of the Sith. Oh,
Did I say Revenge of the? I may have said Revenge of the Sith.
But Return of the Jedi was 81.
Was it really?
I'm almost certain, because there were 2 years between the Star Wars movies.
I thought it was 3.
Oh, it was 83.
Anyway,
It
it was 83.
What happened in 1981?
Oh, that's only 6 years. Oh, the Empire? I don't know. But
I mean, regardless, we both just lost our nerd cards, so
yeah, his publication spans a decade, and I guess now that we know, it's longer than the original trilogy was. So his arc is this several issue long story that all exists within the Star Wars universe and happened and has relevance. And you don't really see that relevance in the films per se, but you do see it in other works, and the other works do complement one another.
Oh yeah,
especially in the case of like Lucino, who just takes notes from everything in Star Wars and crams them into his one book as like fun facts.
Yeah, and like and to go back to Crate, which is a really easy one to go back to because he appears in so much media. Like he's not just in the Outlander comics and then the Republic comics, and then Legacy comics. He makes smaller appearance in novels and stuff as well, and there are lots of characters like that.
He fights Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, exactly. He fights Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like I would say after Luke is probably the second most popular character, or I would say they're probably interchangeable in terms of popularity. But like he interacts with all these fan favorite characters. He interacts literally with every Skywalker. He interacts with
He does,
Anakin,
doesn't he?
and then he interacts with Luke, and then interacts with Cade Skywalker. So he interacts with literally 3 different generations of Skywalker. But as far as like other long characters with that much like screen time, like we get Luke, who again is my favorite character, and you can follow him from his birth in Episode 3 all the way until he's an old man with a teenage son in the final novel of the EU, and you get all that growth, and it's just a thing that like a movie can do but can't do as well of showing someone's entire life like novels, comics, and stuff can.
Oh yeah, the closest thing we've gotten to that I think is the MCU, because that's like 22 films.
Yeah, exactly, and it's been going on non-stop for basically 10 years.
They released multiple films a year.
Exactly, versus Star Wars, which has if we're taking it just with the original saga, is 6 years or 6 films over however many years, but you had that
decades,
basically decades, except for the fact that there was nothing released from Return of the Jedi to Phantom Menace movie wise, but of course, as far as this goes, you can't have best without worst, and in my opinion, which is the next question as well, the worst thing about the EU is some stories end up suffering from, I don't know if there's an actual term for it, but it's basically prequel plot armor, where a character cannot die, which basically kind of happens in the prequels with Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Palpatine, and Yoda. They can't die, and it happens in the EU as well. Because you can pick up, say, the novel Death Troopers, which takes place before Episode 4, but features Chewbacca and Han Solo. Well, that those characters are in no danger, and I think what kind of happened sometimes with, especially the post-Return of the Jedi stuff, was I think some of the writers got like cold feet, and they were worried people wouldn't like the books if they didn't feature like prominent characters from the series. So you do end up with some series, like it usually happens more with the standalone novels than with the big long series, where a lot of main characters will feel kind of shoehorned in, like Han Solo and Chewbacca and Death Troopers, Luke Skywalker being inserted into the Mara Jade book, Allegiance and Choices of One, and I what there's the novel Rogue Planet, which kind of serves in a way as a prequel to the New Jedi Order series. It kind of feels like Anakin and Obi-Wan are shoehorned into it, so you end up with where they're trying to shoehorn these popular characters into these works. And then you also, which in my opinion is the worst thing about the EU, is the stories that just completely disregard previous material. There aren't a lot of them, but the ones that do happen, specifically in my notes, I have written down the Revan novel, which completely, like you said earlier, shafts KOTOR 2 almost entirely. Besides the Exile being the main character, Star Wars: The Old Republic, which again gets kind of the same treatment, and in my opinion ruins the character of Revan, which the novel already kind of did. And then you have the Clone Wars, which big controversial statement on my part. I don't think properly the Clone Wars TV show that is in the media associated with it, in my opinion, does not belong in the Legends timeline. It had so many contradictions because Dave Filoni pretended to care about it, but didn't really.
The best part of the Clone Wars is that it gave us more Plo Koon content, but otherwise it shafts so much material.
It does, and completely rewrites it. And I know specifically for you, introduces a lot of stuff that a lot of people don't like. But in my opinion, these cons are vastly outweighed because with novels and comics especially, you can choose to just not read the things you like. And the great things about this being a big, vast universe is I can disregard the Revan novel, and it doesn't change anything from Knights of the Old Republic. It doesn't change anything from Bane mentioning him in his trilogy or any other reference to him. So it works in that way where, you know, you can ignore a lot of the bad. And those are really the only two things I could come up with besides just the out and out bad novels like Crystal Star.
Oh God. You basically summed up everything I have. With what you said about ignoring the bad stories, I think the worst part about that is the ones that affect me the most are conclusions, the stories that I had loved up until then. We just need to keep Drew Karpyshyn away from conclusions because obviously he can't do them. If Revan, KOTOR, not KOTOR, The Old Republic and Dynasty of Evil are any indication. But it's kind of a shame. I would like those stories to be retconned. Ironically, because retconning is a common gripe with the expanded universe, to be more satisfactory. But it is what it is, and it's inevitable with whatever universe you're depicting or whatever stories you're telling, because not everything can be good. Unless it's very small, very contained, like Lord of the Rings, which is like what, 4 books? Not 4.
Well, it's the trilogy
5.
and then The Hobbit.
Trilogy, Hobbit, and then the Silmarillion, whatever.
Well, there's a lot. There's actually a lot more stuff to it than that.
Oh God. Okay, never mind.
Well, not a lot, but like I know what you mean. Like those are kind of like the 5 big things.
But those are all critically acclaimed and renowned. I mean, I personally could not get through them, but they're all good stories. And when you have something that's expansive as the Star Wars universe, or the expanded universe rather, bad stories are going to be there. There's no helping it. You can't. It is inevitable. But it's not a problem I really have with the EU because there's so much good stories, and I would definitely argue that the good outweighs the bad. But generally, that's a statement. The inverse of that statement is generally said by people who haven't picked up an EU book and just ignorantly complain about how bad it is without actually having delved into it or ever had a love of it.
Yeah, which is very true. And that actually brings to the last question here, and that is, what does Star Wars mean to me? Again, I tried to summarize it all down so I don't spend 45 minutes just getting sappy. But I mean, Star Wars is unironically it's my favorite franchise. The video games, the books, the comics, in addition to the films. I mean, regardless of how many I like or don't like, the films are the core of that started everything. The expanded universe, the the original trilogy specifically. Without that, there'd be no prequels, there'd be no sequels, there'd be no EU, there'd be no books that just released, books that released 20 years ago. But it all of those things just put together just make it just this perfect kind of multimedia franchise. And specifically to me, it's the first series I remember ever truly loving. And I think the only thing that can rival Star Wars with how much I love it is Spider-Man, because that's the other thing I grew up like loving. It was Spider-Man and Star Wars were always my two biggest things. And I mean, a great thing that for some reason really I love about Star Wars, in addition to everything I've said, is there's something for it. There's a story in Star Wars for everyone, whether it's the movies or if you want a story, with like a strong female character like Leia, like she has her own novels, or if you want like a, I mean, hell, there's even a horror novel that has zombies in it.
Zombie.
Yeah. Like, and if you want, like, once you get into some uh I don't know what the proper term for this I guess would be, but once you get into some deeper post Return of the Jedi stuff, there's even some Lovecraftian horror in there as well with the with the character of Abeloth. There's even some Lovecraftian stuff. There's classic smuggling stories and stories from the bad guy's point of view. Like, there's something for everyone, young, old, man, woman. Just there's a story for everybody in Star Wars. And in addition to all that, some of my best friends and I, our biggest common thread, besides just growing up in a small town, is we all love Star Wars. So whether it's a debate between my friend who for some reason thinks rebel ships are way cooler than Imperial ships, or just hanging out at their apartment and talking about that stuff, or
hitting their ankles with ultra sabers.
Exactly, or fighting each other with ultra sabers, or even just going on an online forum like a Reddit or a Comic Vine and talking about, like, say the character journey of Jason Solo. And I mean, it's created so many memories for me. I can remember being a little kid and watching Star Wars with some of my older cousins, and then we'd watch it, wait and wait and wait until the lightsaber fights because we were 7 years old.
Politic bullshit.
Even before then, like, who cares about Luke Skywalker on the snow planet? It's snowing outside. Like, I want to see the laser swords.
Exactly.
To that, to the most other vivid Star Wars memory I have right now that sticks in my head is one time my friends and I went out to a bar, and two of my friends and I, the entire time we were there, had a 3-hour conversation about Star Wars Empire at War. It's just,
oh my God.
it was literally, and then it would branch off into other things, and other people would try and jump in, and we would scare them away with how in-depth and serious about it we were talking. Like, where those like actual nerds from the TV show who are talking about this stuff in like a bar when like two of my friends are playing darts, some of my friends are on the other side of the bar playing pool. Then there's the three weirdos sitting there talking about how the Imperial Star Destroyer is better than Home One. So that's the really short version. As long-winded as that might have seemed, that's the short version of what Star Wars means.
It's much the same to me. Star Wars, like you, is my favorite franchise. That's why I'm so passionate about it and so upset to see something I love get sidelined with the Disney deal and the discontinuation of the Legends continuity and the treatment of the characters in the sequel films. That's why I can rant about it endlessly without the need for breath, because it's just something that I'm so passionate about and I can just generate so much hate or love over. Star Wars has always been a big part of my life. I remember fighting Darth Maul in Walmart, the poor salesman who was trying to promote the DVD's release of The Phantom Menace. I lightsaber dueled him in a small town Walmart. That was fantastic.
Oh, I
kicked his ass too.
Now that you say that, I remember that too, because there exist pictures of me somewhere doing that, and I'm actually glad you remember that, because I'm going to go and seek those pictures out.
Yeah, I had a Obi-Wan Kenobi blue lightsaber, I think it was. It was either that or a Qui-Gon Jinn lightsaber, and a black cloak.
I'm not trying to flex, but I know for a fact mine was the Qui-Gon Jinn lightsaber, because I still keep it in my pickup for emergency lightsaber fighting.
God, yeah. None of mine survived. I used Tajinzo too harshly. They all snapped or broke at the hilt, so none of those are functioning anymore. But this is by far the biggest thing that I have put the most passion into, the most time and dedication into, and being there with all the emotions, hatred for a story or just absolute love and renown for a story. I don't really know what else to say. It's just, it is my heart, and that's about it.
So, but no, that with that conclusion, then that does do it for the questionnaire. This is going to be first of hopefully many videos between Tristan and myself. And if you are ever interested in more of Tristan's content, like he said earlier, what was your YouTube channel again?
It's just my name. It's Tristan Robertson, Rober.
Yeah,
put a link in the description or annotation or something.
Yeah, I'll make sure to link that. But as far as me, the Legends Library is going to kind of be my bread and butter. I'll be working on this. I do have plans for some shorter form content, hopefully in the near future as well. And I may at some point be popping up on Tristan's channel as well. So,
Indeed.
Do you have any other parting words before we head out here?
I do not think so. May the force be with you.